Welcome, everyone. Simon Rosenberg, Hopium Chronicles. What's going to be an interesting event today. I thought this was going to be just Stuart Stevens and I reflecting on the amazing election we had last week. But we have other things to talk about today. Welcome, Stuart. Thanks for joining me today.
Great to be here, man. What the fuck's going on with these Democrats, huh?
I want to start by doing the obligatory. We had a great election last week. It was one of our best elections we've had in a long time, certainly since 2020, maybe 2018. There was a clear message of repudiation of Trump. There was really no, sometimes, Stuart, elections are complicated and they send nuanced messages. This one was not complicated. This was a clear and rousing message of repudiation against Trump and his rancid regime. And then here we are a week later in a different place. And, we had a big win Tuesday. We did not have a big win last night when 8 Democratic senators made a decision to join with the Republicans to reopen the government against really the wishes of the American people, frankly, and most of the Democratic Party. But here we are. And do you want me to take the first stab, or do you want
to? I mean, is this like one of these things where they're trying to cover the spread and they're going to win by too much?
I think. Listen, I think that we have to take what they're saying at face value, that they believe they were doing the right thing and that they were protecting tens of millions of Americans from harm from Trump. And I think that part of in our
Chamberlain.
Yeah, I understand. And I said, the sentiment is correct. The analysis is incorrect. I disagree with it. And they, I think this was a mistake. And I think it was a mistake because there are 2 lessons that we have to always learn from our battles against autocrats, which is that if you appease, if you give in, they take more. It's an incentive. They see you as weak. And the second one is that, I think that in some ways, in the Hopium community this morning, I had a second point, but I'm forgetting. But let me get to what I was going to say anyway, is that I'm a little, like everybody, I think a little frazzled today. I was expecting to have kind of a calm, joyous, celebratory victory lap week from our election, not really working out that way. But I think the other thing that that's come up in our conversation in Hopium today is that, was this always the outcome? And was this always going to be the outcome once Schumer and Jeffries decided, I think, courageously to take this on back at the end of September, early October? And I think the answer to that is no, because I don't buy the idea that the likely scenario here was that Trump would start shooting the hostages. I mean, it was always a possibility, but also Donald Trump is a deal guy. He's negotiating deals with foreign leaders all over the world. He seems uninterested in negotiating to help the American people and to help our democracy. And I think that part of what motivated the Gang of 8 yesterday to take their action was the sense of increasing harm that was happening, and they wanted to protect the American people from harm. I think this was a short-term. I don't agree with the decision, as you pointed out, but I also think this was being done out of a virtuous sense and not one of that capitulation. But I do think that, Stuart, going back to something you and I have discussed a lot in our regular conversations, the Democratic Party is still in a confused place about strong and weak.
Yeah.
And about strong leader, weak leader kind of stuff in our politics. It's just too secondary to how we look at politics every day, where it's primary for Trump and the Republicans. And this has also got to be, I think, a big lesson coming out of what happened in the last few days.
Yeah, look, I think a couple of things. One, I think it's fair to say that Donald Trump will always have a higher pain threshold when it comes to other people because he basically doesn't care.
Right.
I mean, if you said to Donald Trump, in 2016, you'll get to be president, but you have to offer up one of your kids as tribute, his only response would have been, could I pick the kid?
Right, which one?
Yeah, which one? And I agree with you that I think this is well-intentioned. And ultimately, I always go back to this back in my political consulting days. In 2 months, will it matter? And I think that the larger trends that we saw on last Tuesday, will dominate this moment. That you had, it sort of goes back to, what is your theory of the 24 election? Republicans announced that this was a realignment election and that this was going to be a before time and an after time. Well, that always seemed ridiculous to me. Trump's coalition in 20 was 84% or 85% white. It dropped to 84% white. And it was an election that a challenger should have won and did win. That's not an endorsement. And so if you go back to just compare the exit polls for the Virginia governor's race to the exit polls in the presidential race, you're back to the Black lieutenant governor candidate got 7% of the Black vote. That's exactly the same that Barry Goldwater got in 1964. So that's about as flat a line as you can get. You had Hispanics supporting a Republican dropping to 32%, which really should be no surprise. In Bush, where we really worked at this, we got it up to 42, but then with McCain, it went back down to like 32. And it wasn't like McCain was out there saying they're a bunch of rapists and we're going to deport their asses. And even Asian Americans are back to 70%. So I think, and winning young men. So, I think that the ugliness of what's happening in the country does reach people, does resonate with people, probably particularly younger voters. And I think the fact that nothing has gotten better. I mean, his one issue that he's winning on was immigration, and he's losing on immigration because they overplayed their hand. So, like Haley Barbour used to say, at a certain point in politics, it's good to be for something people like. And, I really don't know what Republicans are for that they like, except, you shouldn't have transgendered athletes in podiums, which is not an international winning issue.
Yeah, look, let me try to give my summary here of this moment in twofold. One is that, and I agree with everything you just said. I think number one is that the elections went way beyond anything that we could have anticipated. I mean, seeing 20-point margin wins in Pennsylvania and in Maine and in Georgia and in California on these statewide ballot initiatives and various elections was extraordinary. I mean, you just don't see 20-point margins in competitive states. And these are places that the Republicans fought. It wasn't like they just gave up. I mean, these were contested races where Democrats had enormous margins. We had enormous margins in New Jersey and in Virginia. And the margins here really matters to me as somebody who's been doing this, is that this wasn't just a win, it was a rout. It was a clear repudiation. It was a legitimate blue wave that washed all across the country. And we all know, to your point, that if you game this out over the next 12 months, the likely scenario now heading into the midterms is that something like this is replicated next year, just based on historic trend lines when you have this kind of definitive movement. And as I've talked about, how in the generic ballot, we've moved 7 to 8 points since last year. In the Gallup Party ID, we've moved 12. You now see Senate races that are the reach Senate races for us that we need to win the Senate and flip the Senate. In Alaska, we're up. In Ohio, we're up. In Maine, we're up. In Iowa, we don't have a candidate there, but our gubernatorial candidate is up. In Texas, our candidates are within margin of error in competitive races. And all of a sudden you see the evidence of this shifting landscape, of it moving 7 to 12 points. You can now see it in the state-based polling for 2026. And so this is a cycle of opportunity for us. But I think the second thing, Stuart, I'll throw out there, and this is something I've been arguing since the summer, is that the shutdown was really only a piece of the battle over the budget and Trump's agenda. And now the Republicans have to, with one of the smallest congressional majorities in American history, where they can only lose 2 votes in the House and 3 votes in the Senate, they have to now defend the indefensible. They have to go into these final budget negotiations to get us to a budget next year and they have to defend the tariffs potentially. They have to defend the healthcare cuts. They're going to have to defend the increases in electricity prices because the subsidy cuts to the clean energy subsidy cuts. They're going to have to defend this domestic police force, the Trump and the tripling of the ICE budget. There is a lot in this final budget that is going to be very difficult for the Republicans to defend. And I think that one of the recommendations that I've been making is that once the government is reopened and checks start flowing again and SNAP benefits are there and the air traffic controllers go back to work, we need to make it very, very clear about what we are not going to vote for at the end of the year.
Mhm.
And that because in essence, I think we should attempt to repeal the entire big ugly bill. That thing only passed with 50 votes in the Senate. They need 60 on all those same many of those same things. And I think we should make it clear that we're not going to give them those votes. And this would be a way for the Gang of Eight to redeem themselves, right? To show that they're not just appeasers and capitulators, but that there's a virtue to their fight. And I think how much of that we can get in this budget negotiation, or then in next year's budget negotiations, or when we come back into power in 2027, we've got a clear set of things that we want to do. We should talk to the American people about it. Here are the things we want, right? Roll back the tariffs, fully fund ACA and Medicaid, make sure that we're funding our allies in Europe and Ukraine and not Putin, that we're aligned with, our allies and not Putin, that we are, we're not going to triple the budget of ICE. We need to draw a line in the sand now on what we're not going to vote for, that our Senate Democrats are not going to vote for, and let them continue to make the case for things that they can't really defend. Because I think they have two options now as a party. They either defend the indefensible and run on the most unpopular agenda in modern American history, one that's polling much lower than he is, frankly, or they start course correcting. And we began to see this desire for course correcting. 13 Republicans have called for the House Republicans to negotiate on the ACA subsidies. We just voted 3 times last week to repeal Trump's terrible tariffs. And so they're aware that this agenda is unsellable to the American people. And we have to keep pushing on both fronts, right? Which is that we got to make them eat it. Because I think one of the reasons we had such a good election is that Schumer and Jeffries, by picking this fight, made the major issues in our country about the harms they were doing to America. It wasn't about process stuff or anything else. It was about healthcare cuts and people's lives getting worse. There was this massive repudiation. We need to keep all that in the news, but we also now, I think, have to show a greater willingness to be resolute about what we're just not going to support in the upcoming budget negotiations.
Look, I couldn't agree more. If I ran the Democratic Party, what I would suggest is that they could take a page from the Contract with America and have a very specific, relatively short list of this is what you're going to get, which is just a version of what you're saying.
Yeah.
That I would say you're going to get a tax on people who make over, pick a number, $10 million a year, whatever. I would say that you're going to cut off all funding for the executive branch. I would say that. I would say we're going to nationalize Starlink. We're going to nationalize SpaceX. And I would have these things out there that are big, exciting to people, and say, this is, I want something I'm going to get here. And to me, it's time for like a little trash talk. This is good. We won, you lost, we're better. This is why we're right. You're wrong. You're got routed. And so, you combine that with one of the things that just really strikes me about the Republican Party is who do they have out there who's not just losing them supporters every time they go on? I mean, they have
Right.
Stephen Miller, who is like a cartoon character. You have Kristi Noem. You have J.D. Vance, who, I mean, if his own family is speaking to him at the end of this, it'll be astounding. I mean, the way that he attacks immigrants and the way he says you shouldn't like people who speak another language who move next door, like maybe your in-laws?
His in-laws.
Like, really, JD? I don't think they're that bad. I kind of like to meet them. I bet they're interesting. And Trump, and who is out there? Who is their appealing figure? Whereas, I think both of these women who are elected governor are tremendously appealing. I think their backgrounds are very important. It goes back to claiming a national security edge. So, it's you need a combination of a messenger and message. And it seems to me that the advantage goes to the Democrats on both. And I just hope they get it together. Where Schumer's not a plus. I mean, nobody looks at Schumer and says, great, I want that. I mean, it's just where he is in his career. It's probably who he always was. He was more of an inside player.
Yep.
I don't think they react horribly to it if you're just it's just sort of wallpaper, you know. And he has the Senate process talk. So, I would be out there trying to put all these other faces out there for the Democratic Party, and there's a bunch of them, and they're really appealing. From Newsom to Shears to, Governor of Virginia and New Jersey.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's a great perspective, Stuart, that, getting beyond the sort of the anger and the frustration of the last 24 hours to, what I tried to do in my post today is to sort of level set on where we were. And I, went through the polling data showing Trump, incredibly unpopular, his agenda even more so. I think the thing that is also going to start to become a much bigger topic of discussion is his clear physical decline, and that is, become impossible to ignore. I mean, the media is doing the best that it can to ignore it, but him falling asleep for 20 minutes in the middle of a live event at his own desk, that took place on Thursday, was kind of an incredible moment. I mean, an unprecedented moment in modern American history to have, he's sitting at the Resolute desk with a camera on him and he's asleep for 20 minutes. And, and so I think that's going to become an issue. And I also think we for all of the obvious anger and frustration of the Democratic Party that has played out over the last few months, the data about relative strength of the two parties over the last few months has moved dramatically towards us. I mean, not just in party ID and in the generic ballot, where we're now substantially ahead of where we were a year ago, but we've now seen in virtually every poll, Democrats have an advantage on the economy, which was not been true, was certainly not true in 2024. I went back and looked, Trump beat us on the economy by 7 points in the election last year. And I think that, we are structurally, things are moving in our direction. And I also think you're absolutely right. I mean, if you look at our top 20 to 30 leaders to compare them to the other side, they got nothing. I mean, JD Vance would have to shave his beard if he was in the military, right? Like, I'm still, it's so funny that Hegseth has waged a war on facial hair, Vance, and obesity. Trump, his own two guys, wouldn't be able to make it in the Hegseth military. And so I do think that as we get through this, I want to come back to one kind of very foundational understanding that I have at the moment, which is that, we have more power than we understand.
Yes.
We are still struggling to sort of step into our own power in this moment. But I think the real test of this moment and our lessons that we take away, from it, because I remember the second lesson I was going to talk about now, which is that I do think that one of the reasons we did so well in the election is the American people saw us fighting for them, right? And that we now need to be fighting really hard over the next few months when the Republicans now have to come back again and get 7 of our votes, for any final budget that passes. And if they can't do that and we hit an impasse again, and they want to get rid of the filibuster, you notice they haven't wanted to get rid of the filibuster. And the overt reason they've said is because when we come back into power, we would use it maliciously. But the real reason is then they have to own their own budget and pass it with their own votes, which they barely were able to do in the big ugly bill. They only got to 50 in the big ugly. This thing is going to be far uglier, the end of year final omnibus that's going to come. And I don't know that they can pass their own budget with their own supporters, given their low margins. And so I think we have them in a much weaker place than I think is the conventional wisdom. And if I can sort of riff off of give you my riff of the riff you went on earlier, we have to get up every day remembering that Trump is weak. He's not strong. He's losing. He's not winning. He's a failure. He's not a success. He's a villain, not a hero. and that we have to, and I call him a big blubbery baby man and anything but a strong man. But we have to recognize that our job in part every day is to pull the curtain back from the wizard, to remind the country that this orange emperor has no clothes, what an ugly sight that is. But it is critical that we recognize that the bubble is piercing. This bubble of strength is piercing. And I'll give you one other example, Stuart, of this, right? And this is something you'll appreciate. So, I've been waging this war against these red wave pollsters for the last few
Yes.
years. So in New Jersey, the red wavers came in and showed the race dead even. She won by 13 points. There were
Like
seven different, yes, yeah, seven different pollsters in the final 10 days, with polls showing the race 1 or 2 points. They were off by more than 10 points, which, as you know, means either they can't poll or these were fake polls, right? And so those 7 pollsters now have been also, and a few others nationally, have been consistently pumping out these polls showing Trump up 6 in job approval, up 4 in job approval, up, even. So there were a series of these national polls that Republicans were seeing that were telling them that everything was okay. That even though we know in the independent polling the bottom has fallen out on Trump's approval rating, these fake polls have been instrumental in keeping Trump's congressional coalition together. Well, guess what happened?
Yeah.
Emerson, after the election, dropped a poll showing Trump going from -3 to -8. You had another one of their pollsters, after the election, moving from +4 Trump to -5 Trump. And all of a sudden, these red wave pollsters, what I call the whoopee, the blankie for Donald Trump and the Republicans, are now starting to show a more accurate window into where he is, which is that he's a despised and unpopular figure with an even more unpopular agenda. And this is a very important dynamic because it will start to loosen the already loosened hold that he has over Congress, in these coming consequential fights. Let's see what happens in that.
It's a really
Yeah.
good point.
And so anyway, I throw that out there, Stuart.
No, it's a really good point. And people aren't talking about that. One of the things I wish the Democratic Party do is stop talking about the Democratic Party. It's like comics don't talk about how funny they are. They just tell jokes. NBA centers don't say, I'm really tall. You know that, and you see it in action. And that's how, you've been in these presidential races, and sometimes, you're losing a primary. It's like nothing, you can't talk your way out of it. You just got to win the next primary. So, they didn't, nobody voted, I think, for a governor's candidate in any of these states, any statewide candidates, to help save the Democratic Party. They voted because they liked that person. They voted because they didn't like the other one. They voted because they liked what they were talking about. And I think that just expecting anybody really to have very strong feelings about any party now is it's just sort of unrealistic. It's sort of an outdated language, it's just a classic case where I think society has kind of moved on, and we have these things, and we're going to have them for a long time. But they are who the people who represent them. That's who they are, and they are what you're talking about. So I don't know, in all of these polls, if I was doing them to try to guide a candidate or a party, I would ask a threshold question: did Donald Trump lose a free and fair election in 20? And if you say no, I would throw you out of the poll, because it just pollutes the sample. Because there's nothing that you can say to those voters that is going to mean anything. I mean, it would be the equivalent of, having a discussion about 9/11, and you go, okay, do you think it was an inside job? If you say yes, there's nothing you're going to say. It's going to change, like, what. So I think that these numbers get I think Trump's numbers are actually worse than they look, because, what percent of those voters think that Trump won? I mean, they just live in another world. And there's no equivalent on the center left side of that. So look, you have to, I think it's always useful in these things. If you were sitting in the White House, people's thought is, what would you do? It's an interesting question, because, change the subject, change to what, though?
Right.
I mean, I don't know, they were talking about making crime this huge issue.
Yeah.
I just, crime is always a difficult issue that if people aren't fearful, and
Yeah.
I don't know.
Crime and immigration is Willie Horton, right? I mean, it's still the same kind of exploitation, racial fear. It's the core kind of, the comfortable place for Trump and even the modern Republican Party to go. It manifests itself differently every 2 years. It has different ways that it appears and manifests. But I think this point you're making about what do they do is really, really important, because when you look at polling now, Trump's in the low 40s, right? He's down, somewhere in the low 40s. His disapproval is up in the high 50s. But when you look at the major issues that people are voting on, or the issues that really matter, he is consistently now in the low to mid 30s.
Yeah.
So it means that essentially 2/3 of the country is not rallying behind his major stuff. It's much bigger than
Yes.
than his approval rating. And the problem for the Republican candidates is they have to run on that agenda next year. And Republicans just ran on that agenda all over the country and failed miserably. And I think the second thing, Stuart, and I'd love your reflection on this a little bit, is as somebody on the Republican side, is that if you're a Republican candidate in 2026, you just watch the leader of your party basically throw every 2025 candidate completely under the bus, didn't campaign for them, didn't spend a dime of his $500 million in his political account for any of these candidates, did things to actually actively make it harder for them to win, like the government shutdown and the canceling of the tunnel into New Jersey. And you're looking around and you're like, this guy doesn't give a shit about me and my race. This redistricting they did in Texas has cost a bunch of Republicans in California now their seats. If we continue to redistrict, there are going to be other Republican House members who will now be basically their political careers will be over. It's going to be interesting to see how they approach voting with Trump over the next 12 months, given that, their political careers are now over. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on, as somebody who's worked in the House and Senate races, what it means by Trump sort of delivering such a clear signal that he didn't really give a shit about any of the Republican candidates running in 2025.
Well, it used to be in the olden days, like 11 years ago, that it certainly all parties, Republican parties, would allow you to disagree. Like I don't agree with the president on this, and you could say that, and in Bush world, Bush would just shrug. He didn't care. He was, what he's like, okay, I'm going to go for a run. But you can't. Can you do that in Trump world? And I think the answer is no. And I think that is part of the manifestations of the party becoming an extremist movement versus a party. A political party, by definition, embraces a lot of different views. If it's a national party, it has to. And it wasn't that long ago that there were more Americans living under a pro-choice Republican governor than one who was against abortion, because you had California, you had New York, you had Pennsylvania, you had Massachusetts, and they were all pro-choice governors of one variation of another. And now, of course, that would be impossible. You couldn't win a primary. And I think it's just you have a party that has room for Andy Beshears and Mondami. That's a healthy party, I think. And I don't see that in the Republican Party, or the ability to do it. Maybe after they all get shellacked in 26, they'll do it, leading up to as the primary starts the day after that race. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's the Faustian bargain that the Republican Party struck. And what people forget is Mephistopheles not only doesn't take your soul, he doesn't deliver. You don't get what you thought. And I mean, just think about this. This just blows my mind. Think about this. the vice president of the United States, you had this sort of shitstorm over these youngish, they were not boys, Republicans or girls, Republicans, who had this kind of Nazi love group chat room, right? Somehow the vice president of the United States thought he ought to go out and defend that. Like, just think of you working for him, sitting in his office, and he goes, look, guys, I'm going to go out and defend the Nazis. I don't know, man. Is that really like a smart idea? But he did it because he thought it would help him with the party, because it would prove that he will be more transgressive than anyone else. There will be no enemies to my right. And if it means embracing a Nazi, so what?
Nazis, dozens of Nazis.
And I think you look at this whole shitstorm with the Heritage Foundation, which really, the Heritage Foundation has been corrupt for a long time. It's really not been important in Republican politics. I did all these Republican presidential campaigns. Nobody ever cared about the Heritage Foundation. It was this sort of self-perpetuating fundraising machine that paid a bunch of people a bunch of money and no one cared. But the idea that they still are seen as sort of an intellectual element of the Republican Party, and they have Tucker Carlson, I don't know if you watch this guy, he's got 9/11 truther films out there. He's broadcasting from Moscow. He's from hanging out with Holocaust denying Nazis, and they go out and defend him. Just like, that is crazy. And, to the extent people pay attention to that, it's like, no, where in America do you do that? You go to the reddest part of America, go to, I don't know, the reddest state in county in Mississippi, and you wouldn't have somebody do that. He was like running for board of supervisors. You're not going to go out there and defend Nazis. So I just think it just shows how lost they are. And, the Republican Party has never come to grips since in the 90s, crime, welfare, taxes, Soviet Union. Okay, crime went down, taxes went down, Clinton ended welfare as we know it, and we won the Cold War. So this was a dominant question we talked about in the 2000 Bush campaign. What does that mean? So we come up with compassionate conservatism, which was never defined because of 9/11. And really, the party has never redefined what that means. So, McCain ran on sort of not being George Bush and on his own personality, but there really wasn't a policy framework there. And when Mitt Romney ran, I have to say, Mitt had very sensible kind of mainstream conservative policy ideas, but it didn't capture anybody's imagination, and a lot of Republican voters just didn't care and didn't show up. And it took Trump going out there waving the bloody shirt to get them to show up. So, a normal party would be asking itself kind of some of the questions the Democratic Party asked when it went through the whole DLC thing. Like, what is it that we are? We've lost these presidential races. What is it? And yet Trump stops that.
Right.
Because a threshold to advancing the Republican Party is to say what a fifth grader knows is not true, and that is that Donald Trump lost the election. It's a real conundrum that they're in, that I think they're going to be in until Trump is no longer with us.
Well, and JD, to your point, JD has so associated himself with the most extreme elements of Trumpism without having Trump's charm and all the things that Trump brings. He's a remarkably unappealing political figure. And only won one election before. He had not barely proven himself over time to be an effective politician. He comes off much more as a podcaster than he does as an elected official, and a commentator than somebody to be taken seriously. And I think that I'm appreciating a little bit today your reminder of just these kind of structural trend lines that are of their weakening, of their to not have a strong farm team in the future, having, are now having to run on and defend the wreckage of the Trump era, potentially for decades that will come, and how we are going through in fits and starts our own, generational turn. I mean, Nancy Pelosi's retirement last week was another sign that we're leaving the era of the Clintons and the Pelosi's and the Biden, the Biden world, and a new Democratic Party is being built. And I think, Stuart, that one of the things that makes this moment, in this moment of darkness today, but as we shake it off and look forward, that we have the opportunity now to go build the next thing. And that next thing has a very strong set of leaders that are going to be leading us forward. We have an agenda, I call it the three-legged stool agenda, which is affordability, healthcare, and threats to democracy, no kings, that is very strong and unifying. I mean, there was a lot of similarity in how all Democrats ran all across the country. And it's important, I think, if I can just add one more piece to my Democratic friends, is that I think it would be facile for us to believe that affordability is the only path forward or healthcare is the only path forward. I think it's all three.
No.
And I'll give you an example. California,
Yes.
I mean, we're going to have a higher turnout in this ballot initiative than we had in the 2022 midterms. And this ballot initiative in California was about one thing, and it was about fuck Trump, right? It was about, it was no kings, it was anti-Trumpism. Newsom's ads were all about the harms Trump was doing to the country. We saw the huge turnout in races across the country. I think that there's this sort of weird internal discussion in the Democratic Party about how we can only do one thing at a time. But of course, I know it's a weird thing, Stuart. We can say three things at a time because it's more appealing to more voters, by the way, if you're talking about things that are their top concern, right?
I mean, well, we've talked about this, even when we used to try to pretend to focus people like having jobs, weeks, education. It never worked, and there were only 3 networks or something. You could. I mean, I don't know. People just don't. That's not how your mind works. You don't like. Well, I'm only interested in what's something called, and affordability is just a repackaging of "Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?"
Exactly.
I mean, there's nothing new about the idea that it's the economy, stupid. There's nothing new about that. It's just a different language. It's like from coaches telling you to drink water to telling you to hydrate.
Well, can I tell you my favorite kind of, I feel like our family, the pro-democracy movement doesn't really have a rallying cry, right? And we don't have a single, and we may never have a single one. We'll have a series, but No Kings has been sort of the proximate and most popular one. But Mikey Sherrill stumbled onto something the other night that I loved, which I'm also nominating as a finalist in the rallying cry competition, which was the New Jersey motto, which I didn't know before, is liberty and prosperity. And I really thought that in a very simple formulation really spoke to this moment. It spoke to obviously a moment over 200 years ago when New Jersey became a state. But I'm nominating that in addition to No Kings as my favorite, is one of my faves here, is liberty and prosperity, because it speaks to the desire to have freedom, but also putting us not on the side of just lowering costs, but putting us on the side of creating opportunity for people.
Yes.
And which is where we have to be very careful as Democrats to make sure that we're for lower costs and opportunity. These are not at odds with one another. They have to be, it's a both and, right? And I think that Mikey Sherrill's campaign, and I had her come on Hopium a few times, she just relentlessly talked about the opportunities that America had given her and her family, her service to the country, and this aspirational, this kind of very patriotic, love of country-based optimism and about the future. I do think that there were important things happened I just want to be clear about the way I'm saying, just to put an exclamation point on this, and Stuart, I want you to weigh in, is that I think that I come away from last week, and I talked about this in a C-SPAN interview I did a few days ago, sort of incredibly happy at the diversity of our wins. And
Mhm.
I think we have to really embrace the rainbow, as I call it. We have to recognize that diversity is our strength. We had candidates that were able to win big time in different places all across the country. And we won in ballot initiatives. We won in in the special election in California. We won a statewide vote in Colorado about feeding poor people. We won. We had more votes in the Miami mayor's race. We could win the Miami mayor's race for the first time in 30 years, depending on what happens in this runoff. The party showed itself to be strong and diverse and capable of winning all different types of elections, all of the country by large margins. To me, that's the big story here, is that there isn't one true path for us, that there are many paths, and that this debate about our future, this building of this next thing, it's a process that we should view as being really exciting and giving us an enormous opportunity to build something better than what we had as we transition from the old Democratic Party to the next one.
Yeah, listen, I think purity tests are the death of parties because ultimately they always ratchet up and you end up being the vice president of the United States defending Nazis.
Right.
And that's, he hasn't even really gotten started. I mean, what's he going to call for?
Cats and dogs, cats and dogs.
I mean,
Eating cats and dogs.
I mean, where do you go after defending Nazis? Are you going
Yeah.
to, go to some memorial service, for the SS? And all of this, I don't think we talk enough about race because all of this is being driven by the Republican Party's realization that the country is becoming a minority majority party, which means it's becoming a more diverse country. And all the Stephen Millers in the world aren't going to change that. So they're trying to fight against that, not by embracing it, not by trying to reach out to other people, but by trying to curate the vote to increase the percentage of the voters that they have, which are mainly white voters, will vote for them.
Yep.
And I think that that's just a sign of how weak it is. Yeah, and I just want to think, guys. This idea that if Ezra Klein was doing this thing, about this problem that Democrats have with rural voters. I just would say, just point out that in Mississippi, the counties that Harris did the best were the most rural. And why is that? Because they're Black counties. And when you don't let yourself fall into saying rural voters when you really mean non-college educated white voters. Because Staten Island wasn't Trump's best borough because it's more agricultural than Manhattan. It's because there's more white people and more non-college educated white people. And I just think just as Trump never won working class voters, he won white working class voters.
Yeah.
Which is just sort of an extension of what you're saying is don't underestimate your strength. Look,
Stuart, I think that's a good way to end, my friend. Right?
Yeah,
I mean, don't underestimate our strengths and don't overestimate theirs. Right? I mean, there are two sides of one coin, I think.
That question you always ask yourself at the end of every day in a campaign: would you rather be, me or them? I'd rather be the Democrats now. I think they have a lot stronger hand to play here.
I think it's a great way to end. Stuart, it's always a pleasure to be with you.
Great to see
I
you,
get
Sam.
to host you sometimes. You host me sometimes. You make me laugh, which is important in this crazy business that we're in. And thanks for a little levity on what's been a tough day, I think, for Democrats. But I think this kind of cold-eyed assessment from people who've been around a little bit that, we've had a little bit of bump. We've had a bump today, but, we're on the right path. This is really important. And so thanks for spending time with us today and bringing
Thank you for
your
everything.
wisdom. See you, everybody. Take care. Listen, if you like this, hit like, share with your friends. And the most important thing of all, let's just keep fighting. Keep fighting for our country, for our future, the American people. We got a lot of work to do, but we had a tremendous election last week. Let's keep that in our hearts as we move forward and go win this thing together. Thanks all.